Thanks everyone for joining today. Today's webinar. My name is Courtney Stepwish-Wong. I am the Deputy Director for Economic Development at the City of New Orleans. Our department's goal is to support New Orleans businesses and strengthen our economy. Employee ownership is one way to do that. Perhaps like many of you, I have been kind of hearing more in the news and in the community about businesses that are pursuing different ownership models. So for example, I saw Patagonia is exploring a really interesting ownership model. And then here locally, I've read articles about Pagoda Cafe and Bellegarde Bakery moving into the worker-owned space. So I'm learning about all of these things. And one of the things that I learned is that we have some local expertise through a nonprofit called Cooperation New Orleans. And so they are putting on this webinar today to share more about the resources that they provide to worker-owned businesses. And so I am going to turn it over to them for today's presentation, an introduction to the Cooperation New Orleans Loan Fund, non-extractive financing for worker-owned businesses. And we have three folks who will be presenting from Co-op New Orleans: Susan, Jaleesa, and Shan. So I will turn it over to them now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Courtney. Hi, everybody. My name is Shan O'Foylon. I'm a founding steering committee member of Cooperation New Orleans and a loan officer, which means that I work directly with cooperative businesses on business development and access to non-extractive loans.
Great. Hello, everybody. So nice to see so many folks here. I'm Susan Sekash, and I'm also a founding member of the steering committee and also a project officer with the Cooperation New Orleans Land Fund. And Shan and I will be doing the presentation today, along with Jaleesa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jaleesa. I am a last year cohort member of the Black Liberation Co-op Academy. I just recently joined the steering team this year, and I am one of the communications leads. So it's very nice to meet everyone, and I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks, Jaleesa. So our agenda for today, I'll walk us through our mission and values and some basics around kind of how we see cooperative economics and our historical and political grounding. Susan will present on some more kind of technical pieces of how we work as a community loan fund and a co-op developer. And then to close out, I'll talk a little bit about what it looks like to work with us and what collaboration might look like. As we're presenting, we welcome your questions and comments in the chat. Jaleesa will be monitoring the chat, and then we'll pause between each section to answer any questions that have come up in the chat that we haven't been able to answer in writing. So to get started, our mission is to develop worker-owned cooperatives and the structures to support them with a focus on poor and working class Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities. We focus in the New Orleans area, but we also see our work as being connected in a lot of different levels. And we're building relationships with others, kind of in Southern Louisiana, as well as across the South and nationally. So building and developing co-op businesses is a really core part of our work, but we also see ourselves as part of an ecosystem of cooperative economics rooted in working class communities of color. And we see cooperation and cooperatively owned businesses as a way to build economic power and a way to organize communities whose labor is most exploited and extracted from in the current economy. So we're grounded in some really particular values. And as I share about these values, I invite you to close your eyes and just notice how the values land for you. Notice what you might get excited about, notice what you might be curious about, notice if there's anything you feel tension with, and just inviting you into that practice with us. So we do this work to build an alternative to racial capitalism. We are building an economy based on cooperation and shared stewardship of resources by developing an interdependent ecosystem of cooperative projects. Culture is an essential part of the New Orleans economy. We honor the Black and Indigenous legacies and lived experience of cooperative economics that show up in our cultural norms and practices. We use cooperatives as a tool to organize and build the governance and leadership practices of poor and working class communities of color, with an explicit focus on Black communities to build and shift power in our lives and in the economy. Solidarity is one of our core values. We work to build and deepen relationships among different communities of color, including across the African diaspora. And we use language justice as a key tool and practice that we use to build solidarity across different communities. And finally, we see cooperatives as one mechanism to rebuild sovereignty, to build self-determination, and as a practice that connects to healing from systemic violence. We are grounded in Bulbancha, the Choctaw name for this place that we are in, which means the place where many languages are spoken. And we also ground in the history of this city, where the port of New Orleans was key in the trafficking of enslaved African people and key to the development and the wealth that was created in the plantation economy. As a French and Spanish colony, this place that we live in was connected to revolutionary struggles in the Caribbean. And we're committed to sharing and learning together around these historical forces that shape the current economy that we live in. And we situate ourselves in solidarity with the spirit of revolution and justice that has been living in this land for a long time. So to kind of continue on our kind of grounding, a really important part of putting these values into practice in New Orleans is remembering our history and reclaiming cooperative economics as a tool that Black and Indigenous communities around the world and here have used and continue to use to survive and thrive. When we talk about the economy, we're talking about the exchange of goods and services, and the economy influences the structure of a society, right? So cooperative economics have been practiced by Indigenous societies, including those societies indigenous to the African continent. And collective ownership and stewardship of resources is a common practice in many Indigenous societies around the world. So at this moment, we invite you to uplift any examples of cooperative economics that you might have experience with. One of the things that we notice in kind of using this framework of cooperation is that a lot of times the cooperative practices that we might have grown up with that are part of our culture, we don't necessarily use the word cooperation or cooperative economics for them, even if we are sharing resources or sharing wealth in different ways. And so, or distributing labor, right, in different ways. So we invite you to kind of tap into your own personal culture and history and share any examples that you want to offer to the space. So just a little, some examples, historical examples of what we mean when we talk about this. African people brought cooperative practices with them to the Americas. And one example here is Congo Square, where there was a market, enslaved and free people of color organized and sold goods and services in that square. It was also a spiritual place. And so the cooperative economics was, a core part of the culture that was created in that space. And enslaved and formerly enslaved people actually, as part of that process, pooled resources to buy their freedom and to buy the freedom of other family members. So we lift that up as that's an example of the kind of cooperative economics that we're talking about. Cooperative economics have also sustained liberation work and liberation movements. Formerly enslaved people established benevolent societies and mutual aid societies. Folks in Louisiana, we're learning a little bit more about this now, established cooperative farms right after the end of slavery. And the social aid and pleasure clubs that we all know about here, were started to organize insurance, funeral expenses, and to meet other community needs of the community that they were situated in. And so all of these are examples of cooperative economics to meet community needs. And a couple more examples from the civil rights era include just that in general, a lot of the civil rights movement was sustained and funded by donations from poor and working class Black people, often at church. And just kind of down the way in Mississippi in 1969, Fannie Lou Hamer organized the Freedom Farm Cooperative, which helped Black farmers sustain themselves and share and pool their resources. So a key takeaway that we want to lift up here is that when we talk about the economy, we talk about economics, there are other ways of organizing the economy than the capitalist economy that we all live in right now. And the mentality of capitalism and kind of white settler society that has colonized this place to treat land, humans, labor, all as commodities that can be bought and sold. And we see this work as reclaiming cooperative practices and building on the legacy of cooperation as a tool for liberation. So as much as that we are locally rooted, we are also part of a global cooperative movement. Around the world, there are 7 cooperative principles that are kind of internationally recognized, with these 7 cooperative principles. And these define how cooperatives are distinct from other forms of organization, other kinds of businesses. And so you can, I'll just read these out, and Jaleesa is going to share a link where if you want to read a little more on what these might look like in practice, you could do that. So voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, cooperation among cooperatives, autonomy and independence, member economic participation, concern for the community, and education, training, and information. So these are all core parts of what kind of define a cooperative. And Susan will talk a lot more about this in a little bit, but at the Loan Fund, we really are prioritizing worker-owned cooperatives because we see that as a significant gap in the local cooperative ecosystem, and because it's really critical to be able to bring cooperative economics to the communities that we prioritize and focus on. So our goal is really to support worker co-ops to be productive and sustainable, which means providing a living wage or a way for worker owners to make a living and to be able to build intergenerational wealth. So some of the characteristics of a worker-owned co-op that we're looking for are shared ownership. So there's at least 3 owners that share the ownership of the business. And as the business expands, there are pathways for ownership for new members. That there is democratic economic participation. So worker owners make decisions democratically and share the economic benefit when the business is profitable. And finally, meeting community needs, that we're not just looking for worker-owned businesses. I don't want to disparage any other kinds of businesses, but just to say that we're really looking at that concern for community principle and meeting needs in the community. And then finally, in Louisiana, there is not a specific legal designation for a worker-owned co-op. And so right now, a co-op can be any legal formation. So like an LLC or any other kind of business entity can still be organized cooperatively with multiple owners. So I'm going to pause there and see what questions have come up. We can probably take maybe 1 or 2 questions. Anyone?
Just wanted to lift out some of the examples that folks were putting into the chat around examples of cooperative practices that they are connected to, and encouraging folks, and some of the historical connections in Louisiana to both the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which was an agricultural cooperative association that's still in existence, and also the Association of Louisiana Electric Cooperatives, which also still exist. So some great history there.
Thanks, Susan. So I just want to see if there's any questions at this point. Okay, well, thanks, Jaleesa's posted a lot of content in this chat, so we wanted to make sure that we're sharing. We have a lot more content than we can cover in this hour. but just wanted to share a lot of resources there that you can look into at your leisure. So with that, I'll pass it to Susan.
Great. Thanks, Shan. And so I bet that some of you, for those of you who joined a little bit late, I'm Susan Sakash. Shan and I are the two folks who are the project officers with Cooperation New Orleans Loan Fund. And so I bet some folks are maybe scratching your head at this point and saying, I thought this webinar was about how I can get financing for my project. So we're getting towards there, but we really felt like it was important to first ground this presentation in our origins and principles in order to understand of how we function as a community loan fund and also our work as a cooperative developer. So early on in the creation of Cooperation New Orleans, we recognized that financing was a really critical tool for the cooperative ecosystem here in New Orleans to both grow and to thrive. And so this led us to connect with Seed Commons, which is a national financing cooperative, which I'll talk more about shortly, in the fall of 2019. And then we were invited to join on as a peer loan fund in the summer of 2020, which is when we sort of formalized as a loan fund. And when we got started as an organization back in 2019, we looked around and saw that there were only a few worker-owned cooperatives in the city and sort of the like post-Katrina rebuilding, and wanted to do a shout out to some of those on the call. We have Birthmark Doula Collective, C4 Tech Cooperative, the Dutch Valley Artist Co-op, and other pieces of our cooperative ecosystem like the New Orleans Food Co-op. And since we've started, which has really only been 3 years, we've seen that number grow from what we could count on one hand to two hands. And so we've been really excited about some of the projects we've been able to work with since getting started, including Civic Studios Design Cooperative in Central City, Pagoda Cafe in the 7th Ward. Wanted to shout out Resolve Financial Cooperative, which is a national bookkeeping cooperative. And one of the founding members, Tama Israel, is on this call and is also a founding member of Cooperation New Orleans. And we've also had a chance to connect with a lot of informal family and neighborhood groups, artist collectives and artists, cultural workers, and other cooperative projects that we see as part of our ecosystem. And we're also excited to welcome newer worker-owned co-ops like Velveteen Lounge and Bellegarde Bakery, and also Travelers New Orleans, which is a bed and breakfast on Magazine Street, into our ecosystem. And they've gotten support either through their own self-research and investigation into the model, and also through other entities like Project Equity. So let's talk about Seed Commons though. What exactly is Seed Commons and how does it help us do our work locally? As I mentioned, it's a national network of local non-extractive loan funds that invest in cooperative businesses to build on the solidarity economy. It's been around since around 2014, and they call themselves a community wealth cooperative and really function as, and are technically considered a community development financial institution in which its staff raise capital from private investors and philanthropy all over the country, and distribute that through a distributed model through the peer loan funds, of which we are one of the 31 peer loan funds across the country. All of those dots that are on this map are the different loan funds, some of which have been around since 2014 when it got started, some of which are even newer than we are. So it just keeps growing. An important piece of this model is that the community loan funds are staffed and governed by local community members who have on-the-ground relationships and also insight into the unique community assets and needs within their home location. And then all of those local efforts and local funds have access to the back end supports provided by Seed Commons, as well as a really rich peer support network of fellow loan officers who have experience that kind of collectively also is pooled in addition to the pooled funds. And so to talk about sort of the successes of this model, since 2014, and these numbers are current through the end of last year, Seed Common peer members have made approximately 204 loans to 88 different cooperatively owned and democratically controlled enterprises in 19 different communities across the United States. And in that time period, Seed Commons has deployed and distributed over $25 million in loans. And we're really seeing both the amount of investment available and the amount being distributed just growing, definitely since we've joined. And at the bottom here, you can see that there's, of the loans distributed, there's a 97% repayment rate, and 92% of their portfolio is investing in Black and BIPOC owned businesses, with 63% of it invested in businesses owned by women, queer, and transgendered people. So we see a lot of alignment there with the Seed Commons values and mission. In terms of the principles that go into how loans are evaluated, we look for loans that uphold these 5 principles. These were created by Seed Commons, and Cooperation New Orleans has signed on to these. So first, building cooperative democratic ownership within community. And so the goal here is that our loans aim to combat increasing inequality in communities by moving resources to cooperatively owned and democratically controlled enterprises that are a part of the fabric of the communities where they're based. And this ensures that more people will benefit from that investment and that the benefits get circulated locally and where they have the most impact. Productive sustainability, which is about investing into financially sound projects that will provide sustainable livelihoods for workers. And that is, we see as key as a piece of achieving community self-determination. We want these loans and this funding to maximize community benefit, which means we want to provide both capital and technical assistance to local enterprises, with the goal of, over time, helping to distribute economic power in their host communities as they also distribute ownership opportunities. A really key principle is around radical inclusion, and that in that Seed Commons lends and facilitates lending to people from communities that have been historically excluded from access to economic stability and ownership opportunities. So this specifically includes Black and Brown communities, women and trans and non-binary people, immigrants and indigenous communities, low-income workers, and others who have faced the brunt of an extractive economy. And then this principle of non-extraction, so that importantly, our terms of our loans when we work with businesses are structured to be as non-extractive as possible. And we intend to work with businesses that have business models that are also non-extractive in their communities where they're based. I'm going to speak a little bit more about that here. So what is non-extractive finance? It is defined simply as the returns to the lender, in this case, Seed Commons, that they should never exceed the wealth created by the borrower using that capital. And colloquially, this is sort of called a borrower will never be worse off than before from working with us. So that is our goal, and that factors into how we are different from some traditional financing vehicles. And so to understand what non-extraction looks like in practice and how we determine what makes a good loan, it's first useful to first talk about traditional lending and how lenders assess their level of risk when evaluating whether or not to give a loan. So traditional lenders will tell you that they depend on the 3 C's of credit history, collateral, and character. And credit history in this case relies on your credit score from agencies like TransUnion, Equifax, Experian. All of you maybe have had experiences with those agencies. Collateral, as you know, has to do with what you own that could be put up against your loan to be taken and sold in case of default. So those can be things like your house and your car, really crucial parts to your livelihood and that of your family. And then character in banking terms isn't necessarily what you might expect. Like, are you a good, dependable, hardworking person? Banks are looking for more of breaches in character, things like evictions, late payments, which may have had to do with something as like losing a job or health emergencies or a hurricane, evacuation. These extenuating circumstances that we see as interconnected with systemic inequities and not necessarily a reflection on a person's character. We don't believe that that we want to be in the business of punishing poor people for the work that or for the circumstances in their lives. So these 3 C's end up being exclusionary to people who may have great business ideas, but because of systemic discrimination are unable to access capital. And we feel that people should not be prohibited from pursuing their dreams because they don't have enough money to do it on their own. So how are we different? A lot of the folks that we are wanting to work with are not going to show up to our meetings with great credit scores or maybe even credit history at all due to circumstances of class discrimination and exclusion. So instead we look at capacity. We want to know, can you accomplish your plan, your business plan, and where do we find evidence of that? We also don't ask for collateral. That's for a couple of reasons. One, it doesn't feel moral to us to take an asset that you may have obtained, purchased without any of our support previously. And as well, again, people may not have that kind of collateral to put up. What we do care about is cooperation. So how is your cooperative business planning to share power and profit with your fellow worker owners? And how do you and your coworkers practice transparency with each other and also with us as the lender? And finally, when it comes to character, we're actually evaluating the quality of relationships that worker owners have within their community, with each other, and with our team. So really, we see a big part of our financing model as being about leaning into relational practices as the way that we evaluate whether or not this is a good loan and the risk on the loan itself. So what kind of financing specifically is available to the businesses that we work with? One thing that I love about our model is that if our local loan fund steering committee and project officers believe in the value that the business is bringing to the community, and if the worker owners can demonstrate a path towards productive sustainability, Seed Commons supports us on the local level with being able to be quite creative with how to get capital into that business. So less about putting up barriers and more about finding the ways to get that money moved into that business. So I'll be giving you some examples of different loan types that are showing up on this slide. But if you have any specific questions that you want to know more about any of these, feel free to put your question in the chat, and Jaleesa will respond to it, or we'll hold that for the questions section at the end here. But I did want to just make a quick note about conversions. Some of you may have attended a session that the Office of Economic Development hosted last December with Project Equity, which was talking about the national trend of retiring owners looking to sell their businesses to their workers. And I don't know if any of you are on the call are business owners thinking about that. But this is a national trend called the Silver Tsunami. And similar to Project Equity, C Commons also has built up over time a proven model of phased diligence that has financed the sale of dozens of businesses that have converted from single owner or an LLC ownership model into worker-owned co-ops. And our model takes a really, again, a localized place-based orientation. And we really, our goal is to find financing that best serves the needs of the future worker owners and the co-op, in addition to the needs of the selling business owner. And one other piece that we provide to conversions and actually all of the businesses we work with is pro bono technical assistance to the co-op for the life of that loan. So really it's like a long haul process that is part of how we mitigate risk in working with businesses. So let's talk about some examples. Our first loan within Cooperation New Orleans, the loan fund, is with Pagoda Cafe. And we have been providing technical assistance to the Pagoda staff as they have been working through the phases of converting from a sole owner to a worker-owned, fully worker-owned business. So this loan is going to both finance the conversion and the sale, as well as the sale of the 2 properties that are connected with the business, which will then be owned by the cooperative. So we are really looking forward to celebrating this loan when with the worker owners and with the city once the sale is finalized by the end of this year, before the end of this year. Some other examples in the Seed Common networks. This is Taharka Brothers, which is a gourmet ice cream company out of Baltimore. And this is a business that has a long-standing relationship with the local loan fund there. And you can see that they've received over the last 6 years, have had 3 different loans that have both allowed for the growth of the business, but also really importantly in 2020, they received an expansion loan, which was essentially in order to support their business model pivot during the pandemic shutdown, when they really had to shift from retail to home delivery in order to keep their business afloat. So that was a kind of a crucial piece that, that really helped save that business. Next up is Ride On Bicycle Co-op in Los Angeles, California, that worked with LA Co-op Lab. You can see here, in addition to an expansion loan, they also had a line of credit loan, which was used to be able to keep their inventory stocked so that they could work on building out new bicycles. And then once those bicycles are sold, they use that to pay back into the line of credit, and that continues to recirculate. And the final example is somewhat different. It's Thrive Santa Ana, which is actually a community land trust nonprofit that came to the LA Co-op Lab seeking to get a startup loan in order to build out a shared retail hub at a community garden site that is going to house 5 different complementary worker co-op businesses, all activating that shared space. So Jaleesa is throwing some links to each of those businesses in the chat if you want to investigate them further on. And now we'll just shift over to see if any questions have come up in the chat, or if anyone wants to come off of mute and ask any questions about the business, about any of the loan types, anything about Seed Commons, our loans, things like that. I see the question here from Latona about phased diligence. And so in the, yes, in this, the conversion of a business from a single owner to a worker-owned co-op, this is a way of testing the sustainability and the value of the business at multiple points with the Seed Commons Sustainability Committee, which is the group that evaluates the loans, to make sure that we are collecting information from the seller, then testing those assumptions or that information that we're being given by looking at their historical information, and then working with the worker owners, future worker owners, to determine the business plan going forward, to how to bring the new group of owners both into a democratically run workplace environment, as well as towards their own sustainability as a business.
I could probably ask a couple questions if nobody else wanted to jump in. That's fine.
Sure, go for it.
Cool. So my two questions. One is just more generally, like, what led y'all at Cooperation New Orleans to engage with Seed Commons in the first place? Were you considering other financial, like, co-ops or institutions in that process? And then my second one was just around, you know, when y'all are evaluating financial viability and business models, how is there a tension that you see between, you know, the solidarity economy that you want to help build and just being within this racial capitalism and like needing to stay competitive within this ecosystem that already exists, and how to like combat that? Are there certain ecosystems that you see that you're building that helps with that, or just any general thoughts?
So I'll jump in with the first one. So as we were, the kind of founding group of Cooperation New Orleans came together in like the summer and fall of 2019. And I was kind of in the fall part of 2019. And I had actually learned about Seed Commons from it was a webinar on Invest Divest. So this has become kind of a core part of the movement for Black Lives Values, looking at taking money out of prisons and other institutions and investments where a lot of public funding is going into the military and things like that, institutions that cause harm to our communities, and instead investing those into community needs, right? So education, healthcare, things like that. And so they were talking about Seed Commons as an example of where investments, public resources or other investments could go into. So I reached out to them, and I think it was over, I don't know, various periods of time, probably a few years of kind of being in different conversations. And I think it just kind of all fell together with Cooperation New Orleans as we were looking at the needs and realizing that there weren't other vehicles for moving resources, as well as the kind of technical assistance around the business development needs, and seeing also in New Orleans like a trend around just a lot of entrepreneurship and a lot of people with really great ideas, and then a lack of access to capital to kind of try to make those, materialize those visions. And then I think, we just had a series of conversations where we were just consistently affirming that there was a lot of values alignment. And the thing that Susan lifted up around the local loan fund really having a lot of autonomy on kind of assessing the values and the impact in the community. So there are other cooperative like networks and things that we're part of for sure. I know there's a conversation about a Black kind of Black co-op developers nationally that are just starting to gather. There's Cooperation Works that does a lot of training. So there's other networks. We're also part of the New Economy Coalition. There's other things out there, but I think for the purpose of moving resources through loans, Seed Commons has been a really valuable network for us to be part of. Susan, do you want to talk about that tension around competition?
Yeah, and I was going to say that I think the piece around what are sort of the needs in our ecosystem. Shan will talk a little bit more about that when she talks about like ways to engage and connect, because there are more components that go into a healthy and thriving cooperative ecosystem, that include things like, in addition to financing, you know, some of the advocacy and policy pieces that exist with the cities, that can really help to spur, in the same way that cities think about how to spur community economic development or small business development as a core piece of their economic development strategy. There's certainly ways that cooperatives fit into that, and there are policies that can, you know, ultimately encourage more growth in that, in across sectors with a cooperative focus. So I think we'll talk a little bit more about that. In terms of competition, I think it's less around competition than capacity, I guess is what I would say. You know, capacity and also fit. So something that I've seen in my time of being in New Orleans and working in that space of sort of social enterprise, entrepreneurship, and business development is that there are sort of different funding channels out there, but often there are barriers to even like match the criteria. And so that is like one kind of piece of an obstacle that Cooperation New Orleans is trying to work to reduce for cooperative businesses that are primarily comprised of and serving Black and BIPOC communities here in the city, and you know, then we are looking internally at our own capacity of how can we, as we get, you know, sort of develop more as a loan fund, how can we continue to provide the level of capacity or technical assistance support that we know that some businesses are going to need? How can we continue to provide that and continue to identify and build out more lending opportunities? So we're going to need to be creative about that, just as we encourage, you know, sort of allied groups around the city to also think about how they can be creative with their resources that they have available to really address the critical needs that we're seeing in our community.
I just wanted to, I think we still have time for maybe one or two more questions. So if you have one, you can put it in the chat or use the raise hand function or just come off mute. But just wanted to add real quick on to Mika's question about competition, and just thinking about, this is another place I think where the principle of non-extraction comes up, because we're looking for businesses that are meeting community needs and doing so in a non-extractive way. So there are like, having a viable business that's meeting community needs actually supports other businesses. Like it can create more cooperation. And so the viability of those businesses isn't, and kind of like competitiveness in the market isn't necessarily based on any level of extraction or like harmful competition. So I don't know, I think there's something there about like, when the business model isn't extractive, then it actually can promote the development of the sector in a way that doesn't happen traditionally in the current capitalist economy, where competition is pitted against each other. So I think there's just, and we'll see, I mean, we'll see as we develop more businesses here, but I think there's a potential for more like that concept of cooperation among cooperatives and a more of a win-win kind of dynamic, because there are so many community needs that need to be met, that it actually, you know, you could have a whole sector that's meeting a variety of needs and not in competition with each other. Are there other questions that folks have at this point?
Hi, my name is Yanada Essex. I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. I have a wellness center on Broad Street, and I have some questions as it relates to applying, as well as does it have to be nonprofit or for-profit, corporation C Corp, just kind of like the logistics of like what kind of businesses do you all assist?
Yeah, it can really be any kind of business. How is your business set up right now?
I'm a C Corp.
Okay. Because there's no designation for a worker co-op in the state, then you can be set up as really any kind of business. But again, maybe I'll go back to the slide that we talked about this a little bit, around some of the criteria that we're looking for is shared ownership. So either currently having 3 or more worker owners or an intention to develop to be worker owned, and having a group of people that are, kind of talking about that together. So looking at a group and shared ownership, having democratic economic participation where the owners would make decisions collectively about the business and then also benefit economically when the business is successful, and then the kind of business meeting community needs. So I think from what you've shared, it sounds like a wellness center would definitely be meeting community needs. So feel free, if you have further questions on your example, you could, we'd be happy to hear that. Or then another. Actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about this now. So just want to give you an opportunity to respond and see if you wanted to add anything, but I'll talk a little bit right now about kind of applying and getting in touch with us.
Right, I think that's the next question. So I'll wait to hear your response.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so how to get connected. As I was just saying, we encourage folks to apply or kind of reach out to us when you have these things going. So when there's a group that's committed to shared ownership, you don't have to already be in business, but at least to have ideally at least 3 people and are committed to the vision of a cooperative, right? So decision making, each person, 1 member, 1 vote. So not like weighted votes based on how much money people put in, for example, or shareholders or anything like that. So 1 member, 1 vote, and some demonstration of the ability to implement the business based on either past experience or if it's an existing business, actually sharing the financials of the business. And the intention that as the group grows, that you would have more pathways for ownership for other members of the business to become not just workers, but also owners. We also I think at this point really would encourage people to reach out at any stage because we have different resources we can offer. There are kind of free trainings that some of our peer members in the Seed Commons Network run. There's just a lot of resources. So even if you're not ready to kind of move with a loan, we can share some like education and training resources. If you are ready to initiate a conversation with us, there is a loan fund inquiry form on our website. And this is a place to tell us about you, tell us about your business, tell us about your interest in building a co-op. And yeah, that's kind of the first entry point into that. But to kind of lay out our overall process, the first part is really learning and education. And so conversations like this where we can share about the loan fund and folks can start thinking about if it's a good fit for your needs. And then inquire, so reaching out to us through that inquiry form and sharing your goals and information about your, where your business is at. And then we go through a process of assessment and intake where we are, meeting with you, talking with you, asking you questions, just to kind of assess, like, is there potential here for a loan? And like Susan said, we really have a lot of space to be creative with the kinds of loans and the kind of, things we can try to set the loan up for, but the whole purpose is for viable sustainability of worker co-ops. So that whole intake and assessment process is collaborative. And we would then at some point bring that idea to our steering committee for kind of a first pass of approval that there's like values alignment and that there's kind of potential for a loan there. And then we would go into more of a coaching kind of technical assistance relationship where the loan officers will provide free technical assistance to any project that we're going to be working with on the loan process. And that technical assistance actually continues after the loan is made, as conditions shift, as different things happen, having to pivot, having to evaluate and assess the business model, if it's working, if it's not working, or how to make it work, really. So we're really, and once we kind of get in there, we're really invested in making this successful. And again, like all of that technical assistance is free of charge when we're in a loan process, because that is our mission and our purpose. I will share one other, and just as far as a lot of people ask about time, each project is so different, and at really different stages. And so it really is a case by case kind of thing. But in general, if we're going to give, I would say 6 months to 2 years, as far as from like initial contact to actually having the loan go through. But it varies a lot, and I think we'll have to figure that out together, like what is a realistic timeline, et cetera. Another vehicle for kind of engaging with us, especially, either whether you have a business or not, is the Black Liberation Co-op Academy. This is a 10-session program specifically for Black workers, organizers, community leaders, entrepreneurs, and families in the Black community to share learning, lift up the Black cooperative history that we kind of touched on earlier today, create our own economic opportunities to meet collective needs, and develop successful collaborative economic practices. And so, as Jaleesa mentioned in her introduction, she completed the program, 21 people completed the program in April of this year, and we'll be launching our next cohort in the spring of 2023. Jaleesa, I just wanted to see if you want to offer or share anything about your experience in BLACA at this point.
Yeah, so I am a co-captain of a parade crew, and I wanted to explore different types of mutual aid and kind of learn how we can take care of each other in a time of crisis. But I found the cohort incredibly inspiring because it was one of my first times diving deep into what worker co-ops are and how they benefit the community. And it really encouraged me to assess the many ways that capitalism can be extractive and exploitative. I think that a lot of us that work in social justice, we kind of operate in these systems, but we know inherently that there's like a better way to do business that's more equitable, and that people can actually work together to achieve success and support themselves and their families without like labor or like benefits being unbalanced. So yeah, I really learned a lot, and I encourage anybody that's interested in learning about co-ops to join the cohort. You're gonna meet a lot of great people. There are great teachers. We're all learning this together, and there really is a better way to operate and do business other than the ways that we've been traditionally taught, like literally our entire lives.
Thanks so much, Jaleesa. That was beautiful. We're getting a little tight on time, so I'm going to run through these really quickly. On our website, there's a subscription page. We have a newsletter that goes out periodically. That's probably the best place to stay connected. If you're interested in BLACA, the application isn't out yet, but it will be out in the new year. And then just some other thoughts around collaboration. So we really see this work of the Loan Fund as complementing other programs and work that's happening in the city focused on social entrepreneurship, focused on business development and communities of color. And we really want to kind of offer that co-ops are a real viable option for startup businesses and for conversions for single owner businesses that want to convert to worker ownership. And we hope that other business developers in the city will help us spread the word about co-ops. We can kind of refer folks back, to each other and share information. We're available for training and education opportunities. And as far as with the city, I think we see a lot of potential for collaboration as far as setting up mechanisms to promote worker ownership with government contracts, to share information about co-ops with particularly like women-owned and minority-owned businesses that the city is in relationship with, and then potentially bringing cooperative economics into programs like Job One or other ones that are really looking at workforce development, and having this be kind of a viable option for building out a workforce that is empowered and that is owning their own labor. So with that, we really appreciate you all joining us. Our information, you can reach us at info@coopnola.org, our website, and then we're on Instagram and Facebook. And thank you so much. We look forward to cooperating with you.
Thanks, everyone.